Hi, my name is AerinMoriarty, and welcome to my channel, where today we're going to be discussing Prince Harry's book Spare and the continued fallout from it. Admittedly, I wasn't going to do a video on this because it took me a really long time to get through the book, and I figured out by the time I was done that no one would care anymore. But honestly, I think that the points that are made in the book are really important. There are a lot of points that aren't necessarily being discussed nearly enough, and I think that this book is going to have a really big impact, especially on younger people who read it. It's no wonder the press has responded to Spare the way they have, trying to discredit any ridiculous point, no matter how insignificant it may seem, and trying to make it seem like it's a slam against his family so that loyal royalists will not want to read it. In truth, this is only the mildest slam against his family and mostly focuses on the media and how the media has tainted every moment of his life, whether it be positive or negative. I do feel like he gives his family entirely too much credit. I would have went a lot harder, but I kind of understand that he is trying to prevent breaking the bridge entirely. This is absolutely a pulled punch, as other people have termed it. It's about how the press has peddled lies, half-truths, and secret conversations between people that should have been loyal to Harry, and about how the press has suffered no consequences for this, even after arguably being responsible in part for Princess Diana's death. So let's talk about me and my relationship with the royal family. So Princess Diana's death happened during a really integral part of my childhood. I really felt like the only child going through depression at that time, and this was also one of the first big things that happened in a media scale that I understood what was going on. I was born in the year between William and Harry, and I saw in them two other children who were going through problems. They weren't the same problems as me, but every other kid that I knew that was my age did not have the darkness in their life that I had. And so I kind of looked at them as role models, and I was really proud of how they were able to stand there at that funeral and not cry, because I myself wanted to be better in control of my own emotions. As I grew older and started understanding colonialism and imperialism, I admit the luster of them faded, and I kind of have been shying away from the royal family for the large part. I admit, like, the concept of royalty is great to me. It's something that I love playing around with in fiction, but in reality, I don't know what place it has in our modern world. We know that they don't have special characteristics conveyed by their blood. They cheat, they lie, they steal just the same way we do, even worse sometimes. The existence of a royal family makes it very difficult for the UK to address the historic problems with classism that it has had. Going into Spare, I was pretty neutral on Harry as a person. I have to admit I respect him a lot more now that he's left royal duty, but also there's some part of me that still has that bond from when we were children and depressed together, and now I realize, yes, he was depressed. He just had no outlet for it. So why should people care about Spare? On a deeper level, the point of Spare is that no one, regardless of their wealth, power, or influence, is guaranteed privacy, but that everybody deserves it. No amount of fame or influence deserves 24/7 paparazzi, and the amount that we justify it by saying they're famous is absurd. I especially hate the "they're asking for attention" line, because human beings deserve attention, but much like anything else in the world, even water, attention in excess is a bad, harmful thing. It's not just you might get photographed while you're out. It's that people at your house, your job, your parents' house, your neighbor's house, your friend's house, all hours of the night, hounding them, offering them money, going through your trash, going through their trash, trying to do anything that they can to find a nugget of information that may be true about you. And they don't care if it's actually true, just so long as they have some evidence that they can use to prove it. They're stealing your trash, they're pretending to be you on the phone and calling your doctors and asking for your medical records, hacking your social media accounts, bugging your phones. At the time of her death, Diana was supposedly bugged by numerous major intelligence agencies. At that point, it seemed like the only person that wasn't listening to her on the phone was Prince Charles. How do you have a friendship with someone knowing that that friendship is going to make them subject to intense media scrutiny? How do you have a successful relationship with a therapist when you know that your mother's own therapists and most close counsel people were telling her secrets? How do you let anyone at all in, knowing that that person could solve all of their financial problems for the rest of their life just by snapping a picture of you at your worst moment? The first 3 women that Harry dated seriously did not want to deal with the pressure of the press. And a lot of people act like this is just an issue that celebrities have, but in the era of social media, when literally anybody can take a video of you at your worst, post it online, and get a lot of views for it, a lot of clicks, and make you look bad, And you didn't do anything. You can be in your worst moment, a moment when you're desperate for help, and then people around you just are clicking their cameras and taking video and ignoring your plight. How many times have you seen a video on TikTok or Instagram or something like that and sat there thinking, why are these people recording and not helping? Not to mention the normalization of parents posting every intimate moment with their child online. These intimate moments are used for clicks and sponsorships without heed to what damage it may cause the child in the future. It used to be that the only children that had fame were those that had parents who were very rich and very influential, and a lot of the times those parents had a vested interest in keeping the children safe. But nowadays you have parents that are financially struggling and realize that if they post a video of their child's first period, first breakup, or some other really intimate moment, that could solve all of your financial problems. You cannot watch families like the Ace family and tell me that those parents have their children's best interest in mind. And especially when you're a child and other people are making your image, you grow up with this shell of a person that you're supposed to be because everyone expects you to be it. You are cast in a role before you're even old enough to understand the role that you're cast in. Prince Harry didn't get to control how he was portrayed to the media. He was the spare, and by definition that meant that he couldn't detract from the heir. We frequently see younger children struggle in the shadows of their older siblings, and this is that to the nth degree. Second sons in particular are often cast in a lesser light in order to make their older brothers look better. There are standards to live up to, endless comparisons. We see that not just in royalty, but also influencers. Look at Jake Paul and Deji and their careers and their success comparative to their elder brothers. Prince Harry was a young boy struggling with the loss of his mother, and instead of taking him to therapy, instead of giving him the emotional support that he deserved when he lashed out, this was used as evidence of how he was naughty Harry, and that image of him was created because when Harry is being naughty, it by definition makes William look like the better son. The palace needed a scapegoat, and Harry presented an ideal one. They made a red-headed stepchild of him. In fact, the media speculated wildly about his paternity in a way that I find frankly inappropriate for a child who is still a child. But more so than that, children's poor behavior does not exist in a vacuum. There are far more traumatized children and adults in the world than we realize, often because we misidentify which circumstances are traumatic. We laugh off things like embarrassing our kids, physically disciplining them, but a lot of parenting tactics, especially when Harry and I and our generation were children, are very harmful to children. It was not common to support the emotional needs of your child until very recently, and a lot of families still do not consider that very important. And especially when his mother died, Harry needed support. As more people realize that their childhood was traumatic and they seek to heal that trauma, I think a lot of more people are going to be relating to Harry. Reading Harry's words now, as someone who has a lot of trauma myself, he speaks very authentically about trauma and the process of healing that trauma. I can feel a tremendous amount of empathy in him, and I can see through his thought process that he's done a lot of work to try and dissemble a lot of the harmful notions that were placed in him as a child. Things like you can't cry, you can't show emotion, stiff upper lip, all of that British nonsense. He describes the way he clung to a belief that his mother was alive, which is something that a lot of people in traumatic situations do. We invent an elaborate fantasy world in our heads that we can dissociate to, so we don't have to be in the full weight of our feelings all of the time. Honestly, if you can read Harry talk about his mother's death and not be moved, you are made of stone. But as somebody who used to use these fantasies, these dissociations to deal with my own situation, I found what he said very relatable. And like I said, a lot of other people who have been through trauma are going to see him as very trauma-informed, and they're going to relate to that. Especially those of us who had our distress labeled as naughtiness just like he did. We constantly label children who are in distress as naughty, penalizing them for how they react to circumstances that adults in their lives should have protected them from. And if all the people outside of you are labeling you as naughty and you don't have a highly developed sense of self because you are a child and you don't have people giving you positive messaging, you start to internalize that and believe that you're naughty, and you don't fight against that assertion. You lean into it harder because that's just your identity. At least that's what you think it is. The media and the royal family attempted to control him and pigeonhole him into this label, and it was at the point that he started to emerge from that, fight back against that, and be his own person, that the relationship between him and the royal family began to change. And I think because it wasn't really visible to outsiders until Meghan and he were married, that a lot lot of people blame Meghan for this breakdown when in reality, it's just him realizing that he was in trauma and healing and trying to be better, and the other people around him not being willing to understand that. And there's a big motivation to do that. Camilla was working on her image, and if he's looking bad, then she looks better. Based on depictions of Prince William in this book and other things that I've seen, it just doesn't necessarily seem like he wanted to have to do more work than he had to. And if Harry was always the naughty one, he just looked better by association, because he went through the same things and he wasn't lashing out. And it is so clear that no one at the palace was concerned about their well-being. The idea of forcing children to follow behind their mom's casket, never once cracking that British facade, it's cruelty. And millions of people watched that, and very few people at the time questioned whether it was right or wrong. Then a few years later, he went on to Eton, and Eton's school uniform is apparently because of some state of mourning that they're perpetually in for King Henry VI, which it's morbid. It's morbid to take a child who has experienced death that closely and put them in a, oh, you need to forever be in mourning for this ancestor of yours that you never even knew. How is any child supposed to succeed and thrive when there's so much death worship around them? He lost his mom, Prince Margaret, the Queen Mother, and his childhood best friend all before he turned 18, and he didn't get proper support for any of it. Then he lost his father to a stepmother who sacrificed his reputation on behalf of her own. And it's more than just the trauma that he experienced for all of these deaths. It's the media and the media speculation surrounding it, questioning his paternity, going after him about substance abuse. All when he was a minor child. On their own, these things are a little bit less egregious, but to do that to a child that has already been through so many bad things in their life? At any point, the people writing these stories could have realized, this is a child that I'm writing about. Or the media could have been like, this is a child you're writing about, and said no, and he wouldn't have been through nearly as much hell. And that's something that really resounds with me, is that I remember when I was a child watching the media talking about how they were going to have a better relationship with the princes, how they were going to leave them alone for the rest of their 18 years, at least until they were adults, but it's clear that that's not what happened. Once, as a child away at school, he let his peers shave his head because he wanted to be the funny guy. He wanted to be the chill guy that was unbothered. Somebody took a picture of that, someone he thought he could trust in a place that he thought he was safe, and sold that to the media, who immediately branded him as a skinhead with no further evidence. Why in the world would anybody behave when everyone around them is just speculating the worst, even when they're on their best behavior? And Harry writes in a very self-aware fashion. He's very honest and upfront about the mistakes that he's made and the things that he's done wrong, and even when those truths are embarrassing. And under this trauma and pressure, it's understandable that he turned to coping mechanisms that were not the healthiest. Harry often took to physical pursuits like rugby, because when you're in a lot of emotional pain, one of the ways you deal with it is by distracting yourself with physical pain. I myself, after the things that I went to, I started going to Taekwondo, and I just loved getting kicked in the head, which probably has not served me very well in the rest of my life. And obviously he turned to substances too, because he wasn't given therapy or the right medication, so he turned to whatever was available that helped dull the pain. And I cannot express enough how much the war on substances has penalized those people that are in pain more than any other people. Many substances have explicit pain-relieving effects. Many controlled substances have known medical benefits and uses in the psychiatric field. We herald sobriety as the only acceptable way to go through life. And sure, if you're a surgeon or if you're a pilot or something like that, yes, sobriety matters. But to the large majority of the population, especially those people who have really sucky lives and really traumatic things in their past, if they choose to, in moderation, use substances in order to handle that pain, I think it is fallacy to criticize them for it, because it is a far more healthy coping mechanism than those people that go out and harm other people because they themselves were hurt. Beyond that, I cannot stress enough how much the public does not deserve to know what substances a child is experimenting with. The large majority of people I knew either drank underage, or they tried a little underage, or something of that nature because they had some sort of pain in their life, whether it be physical or emotional, that they couldn't get dealt with in the proper manner, and they turned to the things that worked. I myself, before I got access to those things legally, would use them when I didn't have health insurance because it was the only option. It was the only thing that took away the overwhelming pain that distracted every facet of my life. Harry was not putting other people in danger. He was not the king, he was not driving, he wasn't doing anything that was putting other people in danger, and ergo, it is nobody's business what he was doing. Human beings deserve an escape. And if we make things less stigmatized, it will allow people to use those things in a way that is helpful and not fall into addiction. One of the biggest facets in addiction is lack of social support around you. And yet we ostracize people who use substances. That is going to make the problem worse. Social support and helping these people get access to the things they need is how you handle the related problem of addiction, not by trying to ban all substances. Harry's follies. So admittedly, I'm going to have to use some code words in this section to avoid being censored. I really respect the fact that Harry explained all of the controversial things that he did in his childhood and in his early adulthood, and did so in a way that showed that he deeply regretted those mistakes and that he had learned from them. And again, I think this is going to be something that a lot of younger people relate to. I know that there's this belief that, oh my gosh, people should have always been good people, and if you've ever done something bad in your past, that makes you a bad person, but that's not remotely true. Most people have done things without realizing that they were bad or without realizing how bad they were, and then have felt bad about it when they were educated on the subject and had tried to make amends. And that is the right message. People don't need to be perfect from the beginning. People just need to show that they've learned when they make mistakes and try and make amends to the communities that they've hurt. While not everybody can relate to wearing a Yahtzee uniform, a lot of people can relate to doing something, thinking it wasn't as big of a deal as it was, only to realize, oh, that is a really big deal. Growing up in the same era that he did, I didn't think that there were still Yahtzees in the world. So I didn't really think it was that big of a deal to label myself a grammar Yahtzee. I thought that that was a threat from the past that was dead, that would never come back, and not that there were still people alive today that held those ideologies and wanted to do harm to people. And when I realized that it wasn't something that it was in the past, I was deeply embarrassed about how I just brazenly called myself a grammar Yahtzee for all of those years. And there's actual literal Yahtzees out there who want to hurt people. Like, I have a ton of Jewish friends. I was so embarrassed. I was humiliated that I thought that that was okay, and that I might have caused them harm by just brazenly saying that all the time. And I'm obviously not trying to justify anybody wearing a Yahtzee uniform ever. It's just the mentalities were a little bit different when we didn't know that. But now that I know that, and more broadly, I know that there's a lot of threats out there that are not necessarily publicized to the world. There are a lot of bad things going on in the world that don't end up in the media because crap like Prince Meghan's tiara ends up in the media. But realizing too that I needed to focus on self-educating myself about what the actual status of the world was, where the actual threats were, and not just being blissfully ignorant and pretending that everything's okay. Royalty and the work. I know that there's often a lot of debates about what is political and what is not, what the power of the monarch is and what isn't. And Harry brought up the additional concern that the purse strings, especially the ones that Charles held, were often held very tightly, especially when it came to the things that he wanted to do. I feel there's absolutely more things that can be done, and can be done in a way that doesn't necessarily violate the political thing. One of the stories that Harry tells in this is how he wanted to help an initiative called Help for Heroes. So he, Kate, and William went out to an event and they wore bracelets. And based on them just wearing those bracelets, people went out and bought those bracelets themselves, investigated that cause, and that cause got a lot of money from that. On TikTok, myself and other people have criticized Princess Kate for her early years initiative because it doesn't really have any deliverables. And in fact, a lot of Kate's work does not necessarily have a lot of deliverables that are really obvious. And some of these things, like, I think she's been working on the early childhood thing for years now. If I were Princess Kate, what I would do is find one piece of jewelry or clothing or something like that from a marginalized British designer and wear it a week. Because that's a life-changing impact on that designer and on their business without her having to do anything other than just wearing clothes. And she's going to buy and wear clothes regardless. If you're on TikTok and you've seen Keith Lee, he goes to these different restaurants around Las Vegas that don't have a lot of business, and all he does is post an honest food review. That's it. And those people's business change overnight because he, with his millions of followers, has a lot of influence. Kate doesn't have to speak out about a specific cause. She doesn't have to do anything political. She just has to be, these are designers in Britain that I like, and I'm wearing them. I think another big reason that Harry is subject to negative press is because of the things that he has said about the military. He goes into tremendous detail in this book about how he was desensitized to death, how he was trained to other people, and more importantly, how when he went back into the real world, there was not a lot of debriefing that helps you normalize the way that the military makes you overreact to threats. Because when you're in a war zone, you have to be concerned about every little click and bump in the night. But when you're on the street, and especially when you're a famous person, you've got a lot of paparazzi that are clicking pictures at you and getting in your way and things like that. That's a hard adjustment for somebody to make. And it's frustrating because there were so many scenarios when he was interviewed by the military and they were so close to getting the point when they were reporting in the press. He did a debriefing after his military duty where he compared war to a video game, and he was blasted for it. He was blasted for comparing killing people to a video game. When if the reporter would have just used one iota of critical thinking, they would have realized that's actually the point of a lot of the military things nowadays. Like, the military works with video game developers and things like that to make games more realistic. They've also done a lot of initiatives where they have tried to make military weaponry and drones and things like that have controls that are either actual PlayStation or Xbox controllers or things that are very similar. Because then you have the whole swath of kids who have grown up playing video games and are therefore very skilled at a very young age at how to do these war things. Like, somebody could have made a really good argument about how the military is using video games and video game technology, but they don't comment on that. They just comment, oh, this is obviously Harry and him being naughty and bad and wrong again. He also describes a 3-day simulation where I'm gonna have to censor myself again, so I apologize. A word that rhymes with scorcher. Harry describes a scenario where he undergoes a 3-day scorcher simulation and how horrible that was. And he also describes how the fact that he went through that with 2 other people and those 2 people lost their minds. Like, we do deleterious things to people's minds to make them capable of going off to war and harming other people, and we don't do nearly enough making sure those people are okay afterwards. Because their mere existence is inconvenient to the government. The government does not want people to realize how many disabled and mentally ill veterans there are. How many people are deeply, irrevocably harmed by the things that they experienced and will never be the same. And I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the US, a lot of times the only career for those people is police. And a war zone and a peacetime police, they're not remotely the same. You don't handle those people the same. And there's not nearly enough debriefing or training to get people psychologically ready for that transition. It's just yet another way that Harry is relatable to a large group of people that is underrepresented, that the press and the people in charge don't necessarily want to have represented. Harry also describes his transition from childhood into adulthood and how it was difficult for him because he didn't have a lot of the traditional milestones. He was living out of his father's place and, places that were adjacent to his father's place that were his grandmother's property. I know a lot of millennials feel a state of arrested development because we weren't necessarily able to go out and purchase houses and get married and have children the way our parents could. And again, it's just another way in which I feel he's very relatable. And honestly, if I were him, I would really try and target the younger audience, millennials, Gen Zs, Gen Alphas. They are going to find the things that he has to say deeply relatable and are going to find him very trauma-informed. Harry talks about grocery shopping, laundry, cleaning up the house, and things like that. And I think that's one of the reasons that the TK Maxx soundbite was so big to be debunked by the press, because debunking that debunks the relatability that Harry has. And honestly, I think Harry's relatability is one of the bigger threats to the royal firm. Charles, Camilla, William, they are just not nearly as relatable. When they speak, they don't have that authenticity that Harry has. And for the record, TK Maxx did used to have sales. And also for the record, I know some other minor details oh, his mother couldn't have possibly given him an Xbox because the Xbox wasn't out. Harry acknowledges in those scenarios that his memory may not be fully correct about the exact details because of the fact of his trauma. But your trauma doesn't make you forget huge events. It just kind of makes you forget things like details. Sometimes I can't remember exactly what people were with me, or I'll think that people who weren't there were actually there because in my mind, at the time, I was wishing they were there. That doesn't make what he's saying any less valid. In fact, to me, as someone who's gone through trauma and understands the impact it has on your memory, it makes what he says more valid. And let's talk about mental health, because I think that's another regard in which this is very relatable, Harry, very relatable to a lot of other people in the modern world, especially the millennials and Gen Z people right now who are going through things like inner child healing and are healing their own trauma from their childhoods, but whose parents and whose other siblings may not necessarily be on the same path of healing. It is so important to me to note that Prince William and Prince Harry were part of a lot of mental health initiatives while Harry was going through PTSD and things like that. And it took Harry a while to realize that he had PTSD, even after he was helping other people with it, because we do tend to be blind to the impact of trauma on our own lives. There are a lot of people that think that their lives have been perfectly happy and healthy because they have parents who love them, but the way that their parents loved them was not congruous with what their needs were, and that has caused trauma to them. Like, the large majority of people in my generation that encountered physical punishment from our parents feel that way. Like, I know my parents love me, and it was hard for me to realize that my upbringing was traumatic, A, because of things that happened outside the house, and B, because my parents inserted that wedge by spanking me. One of the big things that I think is important is his use of psychedelics to heal trauma, because that's a field of research that's really growing and developing right now, and it has been a source of help to a lot of people. Unfortunately, it's again one of those things that if rich people do it, it's acceptable, it's cool, it's good, but if poor people are doing it on their own, they're bad and they're evil and they should be homeless because they deserve to be homeless. We need to make access to these things more available to people who need them, regardless of their income level, and give people safe spaces to consume. This also really resonated to me because a lot of people in my life say they're pro mental health and they're like, oh, you should just go to therapy, but they never go to therapy themselves. And Prince William is a big example of this in Harry's book. I've seen this bite a number of my friends in the butt. Their parents or their friends will tell them, oh, you need to go to therapy, but they don't actually want you to become better, and they don't want to have to do anything necessary to help you become better. If they're doing things that are causing you additional pain and distress, they don't want to change that. They just want you to go to therapy so you're less of a problem for them. And that just really seems what Harry was expected. They wanted him to go to therapy so he wasn't a problem anymore, so he would just put on that blank facade anymore. But acting like you don't have emotions, that's not sanity. That's insanity. Embracing your emotions in the full breadth of the human experience, that is sanity. But more broadly, there's a lot of difficulty that people go through self-improvement experience because they start learning how to use boundaries. And a lot of people around them are used to those people not having boundaries. And the moment you establish a boundary with them, which is what seems to happen to Harry and William, he has started establishing boundaries, and then all of a sudden he was unreasonable, and William wouldn't listen to anything that he has to say. That is so authentic to the experience that a lot of people experience. When they go to therapy, they learn what boundaries are. They learn how important it is that their boundaries aren't violated, but then they go out in the world and they try to get the people that claim to love them to respect those boundaries. But that's not convenient to them, and they only care about your therapy if it's convenient to them. But also there's definitely gaslighting in here, and I think that's kind of what happened with Tiaragate based on how it's described. The Queen acts like she wants to give them a tiara for the wedding because then she doesn't look like the bad guy, and Angela, her assistant, decides that she wants to be the bad guy, either because the Queen directed it or because Angela is racist, not really sure which, but I'll leave both options up for grabs. Angela just kept making excuse after excuse after excuse why the tiara couldn't be delivered until it was almost too late. And I've experienced similar things where I've had bosses that have said, oh, we're gonna give you accommodations, we're gonna make your job easier for your disability, we're gonna do the things that you need to do, you just need to go to HR, and then HR tells you no, 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 no. Your boss doesn't have to deal with the drama of saying no. They don't have to deal with you being mad at them. They don't have to deal with any of the consequences, and they get to commiserate with you. Oh, I'm sorry that HR is so, and so, no. Your boss could tell HR to make accommodations if your boss really wanted HR to make those accommodations.
Editing Erin here. I have since seen suggestions that as the Queen and Charles have gotten older, especially since they don't have direct access to the internet, they don't have social media, they don't have phones of their own, so they interact with the world entirely through the palace switchboard and through their people. And it definitely seems like as they've gotten older, their people have taken advantage of this relationship, and I've seen suggestions that the Queen was not necessarily in control of a lot of things that happened in her life, and a lot of the way that things were handled for the last couple of years that she was alive because of this indirect thing, because there were so many staffers between her. So I want to open up that possibility as as well. It is a possibility that the queen was trying to be nice to Meghan. She really was trying to be inviting, and she didn't necessarily realize what her staffers were doing because she was so old and, quite frankly, a little decrepit at the end.
So while the exact scenario of Tiara Gate and that tiara situation isn't necessarily relatable, the way it plays out is very relatable to circumstances that often happen in the career world for a lot of people. And in so many scenarios, the cruelty is the point. There are so many times when people want you to believe, oh, I'm sure that this person doesn't mean for their actions to have cruel consequences. I'm sure that those people that are anti-trans legislation don't actually want trans kids to hurt themselves. Yes, they do. The cruelty is often the point, making other people suffer, feeling that other people deserve to suffer because their lives have been too easy or they don't appreciate what they have. It is all too common, especially in the higher-ups in society. And realistically, there is not a single good argument in the world for why the palace could continue to shelter and secure Prince Andrew after what he has been accused of doing, but not at least extend security to Harry and Meghan, especially after the fact that a lot of the negative things that have gotten to the press about Harry and Meghan seem to have been coming from within the palace themselves. Meghan's life would not be in jeopardy if she had not married Harry. And I get, oh, they're trying to save money. If they were trying to save money that bad, Andrew would be on the street by himself. The message you are sending people is that it is more acceptable to harm children than it is to talk out about the harm that your family has caused you. People deserve the right to speak out about the harmful things that have happened to them, even when it has come at the hands of their family. Because that harm has resulted in trauma to a lot of people, and in order to get past that trauma, in order to heal from it and be a better, more functional human being, they need that struggle to be in the open. And often a lot of us, like, I was spanked as a kid, and I used to be one of those people, I was spanked and I turned out okay. No, I didn't turn out okay back then, because I thought it was okay to put my hands on a child back then and harm that child just because they weren't being obedient. As an older person with a lot more therapy under my belt, I realized that being spanked as a child is one of the things that formed a huge rift between myself and my parents. I could not trust them because they alternated between hurting me and saying that they loved me. And I could not believe that they loved me, because if they loved me, why are they hurting me? If your family does not treat you with love, honor, and respect, they deserve to be spoken about. They deserve to suffer the consequences of their actions, because you, your entire life, have suffered the consequences of their actions in the form of mental health issues. The least they can do is just deal with their reputation having a little bit of a hit. After what happened to Diana, and after unprecedented threats on Meghan's life, it is egregious to me that they just cut her security with very little notice, after promising a year to get the situation together. And they were told it was going to be $6 million for their protection per year. And I get that they do have a lot of money and they have rich friends and stuff like that, but that is an egregious amount of money for an individual citizen to have to pay for their protection because their family endangered their lives. And I refuse to believe that Harry and Meghan were losing the palace money unless the palace was really mismanaging things. Because I've seen that something like $1 billion of merch was sold because of their wedding. $1 billion! And they can't spare a security detail? Myself and others have both noticed that this book seems to be a pulled punch, and I think the biggest signs that it's a pulled punch is the fact that Harry still believes that there's justification for a monarchy. He's not an anti-monarchist at this point in time, and I get that. It's probably not necessarily something that is necessarily going to come to him. But especially seeing what they have to do in order to keep their power and to keep their reputations and things like that, it is really hard for me to believe that their monarchy is really that good of a thing for the UK. Sure, tourist money, but is that money going to the people most in need? Like, if the money from tourism to Buckingham Palace was feeding children as part of Kate's early childhood campaign, then sure, it's valuable. Harry is still defending things that I think are pretty indefensible too. Like, you just cannot throw away your child the way they did just because they're not stepping in line the way you want them to. Like, the way they cast aside Harry, or just because he was trying to keep his wife safe and his child safe, which is entirely a reasonable reaction given how many threats there were against Meghan and what happened to his mother. So many people in his life have had kidnapping attempts or been shot at or all sorts of things. It is egregious. And while he did mention the situation with Andrew and the accusations, I think he could have gone a little bit harder on that, especially given the fact that the palace continues to shelter Ellen. I may sound like a broken record here, here, but I just cannot get over the fact that the palace thinks, yes, we're going to put Andrew over here, we're going to put him in a house. And I think the only reason they're doing that is because they don't want Andrew to write a tell-all, although it seems like Andrew's thinking about that. I don't know how many people are going to be willing to read that. I'm not going to pay for it, that's darn certain. So what has the fallout been so far? So I think one of the biggest fallouts has definitely been on the social media side of things, on Instagram, on TikTok, those type of royal commentators. And a lot of times they don't get a lot of credit. People like Matter of Fact, I think she gets slammed by the conventional media sometimes in a way that is totally unfair to her. And I think the reason for that is because the numbers on her videos, she can get hundreds of thousands of views. She can get millions of views. That's a lot of eyeballs. So many people, both in the social media space and in the regular media space, read this book. And even if they didn't initially believe everything that was put in there, they're going to have the things that Harry said in the back of their mind when they're seeing other stuff happen in the media. When Meghan hasn't come out of her house in a month and a half, but is suddenly in the news because of something that happened months ago that seems to have been leaked by a very private source and miraculously corresponds to a day that Camilla is getting bad press. Like, I am seeing people like Amanda, Matter of Fact, and other royal commenters, especially those that have a younger audience, I see them factoring in, well, Harry said this, and now I notice that Meghan's in the news today, but so also is Camilla. This seems suspicious. They are teaching media literacy to the younger generation of royal fans or foes, depending on which way they turn. The seed has been planted that they use news about Meghan and Harry to obfuscate other negative news about the family. And royal watchers are not going to forget that. And I think as time passes and as the palace continues to, they haven't seemed to have changed their strategy. They're still doing it till time of recording. And I think their refusal to switch that strategy, because it has always historically worked for Camilla since the beginning, it is going to be one of the things that harms the monarchy if they don't start listening to the criticism that they're receiving from people that are trying to support them, that want to support them, that are interested in supporting them, or at least people that aren't entirely negative against the monarchy. So many Gen Z and Gen Alpha people are getting their royal news from these commentators on TikTok and Instagram, and they're getting this information. So even if they didn't necessarily read Spare, they're getting the information that was in Spare, at least the important parts, the anti-media, anti-press parts. And I think unless Charles, Camilla, Kate, William, unless they become more relatable and start reaching out to the younger generation more, and start showing feelings, emotions like they've grown. As older fans of the royals die, there are going to be less and less people that support the monarchy. But honestly, I kind of think to a degree that Charles and Camilla aren't super concerned with whether or not they're the last king and queen. I would be more concerned about it. They just seem entirely too blasé about things. I would be a lot more worried, especially with the values that younger people have. The press, and to a smaller degree Camilla, by her weaponization of the press, by her using those stories, and Camilla by giving private information to the press, they come off looking very bad in this book. And looking back to some of the initial headlines when Princess Diana died, like, show us you care, trying to get the royal family to lower the flag to half-mast. Why didn't the press show Diana that they cared by leaving her children alone, like they swore they were going to, but forgot? One of the other narratives that this book helps to debunk is the narrative that Meghan, like, connived her way into the royal family. It is clear that Harry was the one that initiated everything. And in fact, they got into an argument early in on their relationship, and she set an ultimatum that he needed to not talk to her the way that his father had talked to his mother, that he needed to go to therapy, that he actually needed to do the work to learn how to be in a relationship successfully. And it is so weird to me that there are all of these people online who say that Meghan connived her way into the royal family, when Princess Kate was supposed to go to a different university in a different year. She got into the Dream School for her program for art history, but then because William wasn't going to that school and because William was taking a gap year, she suddenly took a gap year and then went to the same school that William did. It is so interesting to me how many people accuse Meghan of doing things that A, Meghan didn't do, and B, Kate arguably did do. I think that's everything that I have to say about the subject. I'm sorry the lighting got bad because it's been storming and everything. I'm also sorry if there have been airplanes because this airport is killing me, it really is. If you've watched thus far, thank you so very much for watching. You have a lot more patience than I do and a lot better attention. A lot better attention span. If you're still here, I just want to let you know that I do have a gaming channel that I'm going to be using more, AerinMoriarty Gaming. That's going to be linked down below. I do short form commentary on TikTok. Faye Iconoclastic is my username there. I also have my bird TikTok account, which is AerinMoriarty. My birds took over my main. I'm also occasionally on Instagram, AerinMoriarty. You can follow me there. And be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I am still a small creator and it helps me out a lot. Bye!